He walked barefooted, starved until his body broke, rejected by the world, but this boy refused to die. The morning of September 12th, 1985 started like every other morning in the village of Okoye. The sun hadn't fully risen. Cockcrows echoed around the bamboo fences. But inside a crumbling mud hut with a leaking roof, a woman named Nneka was fighting for her life on a raffia mat spread on the cold earth floor. Push! Push! Nneka, the baby is coming! The local birth attendant shouted, her hands soaked, her forehead dripping with sweat. Nneka's husband, Emeka, stood outside the hut. He was a thin man with hollow cheeks and cracked lips. He had no shoes on his feet. His wrapper was torn at the edge. He leaned against the wall of the hut, chewing nervously on a stick. He had no money to take his wife to a hospital. He had no money for even a clean clothes to wrap the child. Ah! Nneka screamed one final time, and then a cry. It was a boy. The birth attendant held the baby up, covered in blood and vernix. Emeka na boy o, come see your son. Emeka walked in slowly. His eyes were not filled with joy. They were filled with fear. He looked at the baby. He looked at his exhausted wife on the mat. He looked around the empty hut. No food, no money, no hope. He whispered under his breath, how will I feed this child? How? Nneka, still breathing heavily, turned her head to look at him. Emeka, she said softly.
His name is Chukwebuka, meaning God is mighty. He will not suffer.
Emeka said nothing. He just stared at the ceiling, where rainwater had left dark stains. Deep inside him, a heavy stone of worry settled in his chest. He had 3 other children already. His yam farm had failed that season. The cassava was rotting in the ground. He owed every trader in the village market. Little did Nneka know, her prayer would be answered, but not in the way she expected. The road ahead for this child would be paved with thorns, tears, ulcers, and pain. But it would also lead to something extraordinary, something no one in that village could ever imagine. By age 7, young Chukwebuka, whom everyone called Ebuka, was already a fighter. Not the kind of fighter who throws punches, the kind who fights just to exist. Every morning before the sun came up, Ebuka would wake up, sweep the compound with a broom made from palm fronds, fetch water from the stream 2 miles away, and prepare for school. His school uniform was a hand-me-down from his older brother. The shirt had a hole near the left armpit. The brown shorts were 3 sizes too big, held up by a rope tied around his tiny waist. His sandals, if you could call them that, were pieces of rubber cut from an old tire, held to his feet by tiny wires that cut into his skin. Every day, he walked 4 miles to school, barefoot on some days when the rubber sandals broke. One morning, his class teacher, Mr. Okafor, called him out in front of the whole class. Ebuka, where is your homework? Ebuka stood up slowly. His stomach was empty. He hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon. A single bowl of garri soaked in cold water. His head was pounding, but he stood tall. Sir, I didn't have a lamp to read at night. The kerosene finished. and my father didn't have money to buy more. The whole class laughed. One boy named Obina shouted, "Poverty boy! No light in his house!" Ebuka's jaw tightened. His eyes became red, but he didn't cry. He swallowed the lump in his throat and sat back down. Mr. Okafor shook his head and said, "Sit down, Ebuka. If you continue like this, you will end up like your father, a nobody." Those words burnt into Ebuka's soul like hot iron. He swore to himself silently that day, gripping his pencil so hard it almost snapped. "I will never be a nobody." After school, Ebuka wouldn't go home to play like other children. He would go to the farm, help his father till the soil until his fingers bled. Then he would sit under a mango tree near the village square and read his borrowed textbooks by moonlight. Other children ran around playing tete and suwe. Ebuka was reading. Other children were eating roasted plantain and groundnuts. Ebuka was reading with an empty stomach. His mother, Nneka, would sometimes watch him from the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "Chukwuebuka, my son," she would call softly. "Come and eat. I managed to get some akara tonight." "Mama, I'm not hungry. Let me finish this chapter first," he would say, even though his stomach was eating itself from inside. Nneka would stand there, holding the akara in a small plate, tears dropping silently into the food. She knew. She knew her son was different. She knew God had placed something special inside that boy. And she prayed every single night on her knees, pressing her face into the cold earth floor. "God, you gave me this child. Don't let him drown in this poverty. Lift him up. Please, lift him up above this dust." Ebuka passed his primary school with flying colors. Not just passing, he came first in the entire local government area. But nobody celebrated. There was no money for celebration. His father just nodded and said, "Good. Now go and start preparing for secondary school." Getting into secondary school was another war. No money for school fees, no money for uniform, no money for textbooks. His mother sold her only wrapper, the good one she wore to church, to pay for his first term school fees. Ebuka walked into government secondary school Okoye with one notebook, one pen, and a heart full of fire. But secondary school broke him in ways primary school never could. The hunger became worse. Sometimes he would go 2 full days without eating. He would sit in class, his vision blurring, his hands shaking, trying to copy notes from the board while his stomach folded in on inside like a fist. Then came the ulcer. It started as a small pain in his upper abdomen. He ignored it. He thought it was just hunger, but it grew. It grew like a demon living inside his stomach, tearing at his walls with sharp claws. One evening, during prep time in the school hall, Ebuka bent over his desk and vomited blood, pure red blood, splattered all over his open notebook. The boy sitting next to him, a tall boy named Emeka, not his father, another Emeka, jumped up. "Teacher, teacher! Ebuka is vomiting blood! Teacher, come!" The teacher ran over, saw the blood, and his face went white. Carry him to the staff room, quickly, quickly!" 3 boys lifted Ebuka. He was as light as a skeleton. His bones showed through his skin. His eyes were sunken. His lips were white and cracked. They laid him on a bench in the staff room. The school principal, a stern woman named Mrs. Adeboye, came in, saw the state of the boy, and for the first time in her strict career, her eyes filled with tears. "This boy is dying. Somebody call his parents now." When Nneka arrived at the school, Running barefooted on the dusty road, she found her son lying on a bench, pale as a corpse, blood still on his lips. Falling to her knees beside him. "My son! My son! What happened?" Ebuka opened his eyes slowly. He could barely see. His mom's face was a blur. "Mama, I am fine. I just need to rest. I have an exam tomorrow." Nneka burst into tears. "Exam? You're vomiting blood and you're still talking about exam? Chukwebuka, if you die, I will die with you." They took him to the local clinic. The doctor, an old man with round glasses, pressed on Ebuka's stomach and Ebuka screamed in agony. "Severe gastric ulcer," the doctor said, shaking his head. "This boy has been starving for a long time. The ulcer has eaten deep into his stomach lining. If he had come 1 week later, it would be perforated. He would have died." Nneka's legs gave out. She collapsed on a chair. How much for the treatment?" she asked, her voice trembling. 5,000 naira for the drugs and injections at least. 5,000 naira to Nneka. That might as well have been 5 million. She didn't have it. She didn't have 500 naira. She went outside the clinic, knelt on the gravel and cried like she had never cried before. She beat her chest. She pulled her hair. She asked God why. Then she wiped her tears, stood up. She went to every trader she knew. She begged. She pleaded. She promised to pay back. She sold everything she had left. Her pots, her old clothes, her husband's only good shirt. She gathered 4,800 naira. The doctor, seeing the desperation in this woman's eyes, waved the remaining 200. "Take the drugs. Give him proper food. No more starving. If this ulcer comes back, it will kill him," the doctor warned. For 2 weeks, Nneka walked to the school every morning, a 1-hour journey each day, to bring Ebuka food, plain rice with a little stew, sometimes just yam and palm oil, but she made sure he ate. Ebuka recovered. The ulcer didn't kill him, and something inside him hardened. Something shifted. He became even more determined, even more hungry, not for food, but for success. He studied like a man possessed. He read every book he could find. He borrowed, he stole reading time, he sacrificed sleep, he sacrificed everything. And when the WAEC result came out, Ebuka scored 7 distinctions and 2 credits. 7 distinctions, the highest in his school, one of the highest in the state. But his father, Ebuka, looked at the results and said, "Good, but how will we pay for university?" This question hung in the air like a dark cloud. Getting into the university was nothing short of a miracle. Ebuka applied to the University of Benin. He passed the JAMB exam at a high score, but when the admission list came out, his name wasn't there. He checked again, not there. He checked a 3rd time, not there. Someone told him it was because he couldn't pay for the acceptance fee on time. His name had been replaced. Ebuka sat under a tree outside the university gate and wept. Not softly. He wept like a man who had been stripped of everything. The years of hunger, the ulcer, the pain, the walking barefoot, all of it felt like nothing if he couldn't get into the university. But God wasn't done with him yet. Through a distant relative who worked in the admission office, Ebuka's name was restored. He was admitted to study economics. But the struggle didn't stop. It transformed. University life was a different kind of life. While other students wore designer clothes, carried laptops, and ate in fancy restaurants, Ebuka wore the same 2 shirts he had brought from the village, alternating them throughout the week. He lived in the cheapest hostel off campus, a room no bigger than a toilet, with a leaking roof and no electricity. He shared the room with 3 other students. They all slept on tin mattresses on the floor. Food was a constant nightmare. Some days he ate once, some days he drank only water and chewed gum to full his stomach. His ulcer returned, not as bad as in secondary school, but it came back with a vengeance. A dull, constant pain in his stomach that never fully went away. He could press his hand against his abdomen during lectures, grinding his teeth, trying to focus on what the lecturer was saying while his stomach screamed at him. To survive, Ebuka did very menial job he could find. He washed cars, he carried blocks at construction sites, he worked as a security guard at night, standing outside a warehouse from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., then rushing to attend 8 a.m. lectures with red, exhausted eyes. One night, while on guard duty, his lecturer, Professor Iyare, drove into the warehouse to pick up some equipment. He saw Ebuka standing there, half asleep, holding his stomach. "Ebuka, is that you?" the professor asked, stepping out of his car. Ebuka snapped to attention. "Yes, sir. Good evening, sir." Professor Iyare walked closer, his face filled with concern. "What are you doing here at this time of the night? This is not where you should be." Ebuka looked at his feet. "Sir, I am working here to pay my school fees. My rent is due. I haven't eaten since yesterday." Professor Iyare was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket, brought out 2,000 naira and pressed it into Ebuka's hand. "Take this, eat something, and come to my office tomorrow morning. We need to find a better way." That small act of kindness changed Ebuka's trajectory. Professor Iyare connected him with a scholarship program. It didn't cover everything, but it covered tuition. Ebuka still had to fight for feeding and accommodation, but at least the fees were handled. 4 years of grinding, starving, ulcer popping, tear-soaked struggle later, Ebuka graduated. Not just graduated, he graduated with a second-class upper in economics. On graduation day, as he stood in his borrowed gown and received his certificate, he looked up at the sky and whispered, "Mama, we made it." His mother wasn't there. She couldn't afford the transport to come, but she was in the village, kneeling on the floor of her hut, praying and crying and thanking God.